Gamers, what is your most memorable gaming moment, happy, sad, or otherwise? This might not be the most amazing moment in gaming history, but for me, it's a moment I keep coming back to time and time again as one of my most memorable. The time when I surprised a veteran of a strategy game. Back in 2012, when I was still playing on my dad's old Advent laptop, I managed to get my hands on the original Homeworld real-time strategy game through less than legitimate means. I'd finished playing the campaign, I'd got tired of playing against the AI, and I wanted a bit more of a challenge by playing against other people. But by this time, Homeworld was 13 years old, and the multiplayer servers had long since been shut down. But I still managed to get online using a third-party program called Game Arranger that essentially simulated LAN parties. Remember those? I was pleasantly surprised to find out that there was still a little bit of a community around this game on Game Ranger. And there were a couple of clans made up of these few sporadic players, including one called the Fallen Lords, or TFL. I would later become a member of the Fallen Lords when I was still under my old username of Babylon. And my special moment in question was one of the reasons why I was accepted into the clan. There was this other player in the Fallen Lords by the name of Mad Grenade, and this guy was a veteran, best I could tell. He was better than I would ever be. Hell, I think he's better than I am even now. By the time I first faced him in battle, I had only been playing for about a month. Mad Grenade had been playing at least a year, almost certainly longer. So he understandably wiped the floor with me every time I faced him in a 1v1 battle. And yet he was also a mentor. He would teach me how to get better along with another member of TFL called Quarry. And gradually, as the months went by, I was starting to last longer and longer in battles. But I could never defeat Mad Grenade. Sure, sometimes I did manage to destroy his last remaining ship, but that was always in a group battle when there was other players, and Mad Grenade wasn't the best player there. There were other players who were better than he was. Every time he defeated me in battle, I wanted to come back for more. Not to get pasted again, but to try and defeat Mad Grenade. He had become my rival. I was a lot more innocent back then. These days I'd probably get just angry over it and be like, why can't I defeat you? I'm better than you. But back then, I was determined to prove myself. And I wish I could still think like that even now. So, for a little bit of context as to what was so special about this moment in question, we need to talk about a particular unit in Homeworld called the Mine Layer Corvette. Now, what it did is pretty self-explanatory. It's a corvette that lays mines. But they were not a particularly popular unit in our playgroup between TFL and the other clan called, I think it was APOC. The only weapons available to these Mine Layer Corvettes were their mines. But these mines were very slow-moving. They were not suited for use against strike craft like scouts and interceptors, and they needed to be deployed in swarms to be useful against anything larger, which even went for the lighter capital ships like frigates. And on top of that, Mine Layer Corvettes were a bit more expensive than a typical combat corvette. Say, a heavy corvette, which had actual guns and a special ability to fire a heavy burst that could disrupt swarms of scouts. So, understandably, these things were pretty much ignored by our little community. But I was searching every single avenue I could to try and defeat Mad Grenade. I was desperate to one day best him. I wanted to find any way I could to defeat him. The Mine Layer Corvettes was not actually a grand plan that I'd been planning for months. It was more of a heat of the moment thing, something I wanted to try out to have a somewhat cost-effective defense of one of my resourcing operations, made up of a carrier and some resource collectors. In that battle in particular, I wanted to use as much of my resource units, my money essentially, to build as many combat ships as I could, to try and bring the fight to him for once, because I always seem to be on the defensive. That's something that's always been a bit of an issue with me. When it comes to strategy games, I'm a bit slow. So as my mothership was building all the fighters and the frigates and whatnot, my carrier and the resourcing operation only built some extra resources and 9 Mine Layer Corvettes. And seeing this was the original Homeworld and not Homeworld 2 or remastered, the Corvettes were able to lay walls of mines. I set my 9 Corvettes into a wall formation and then just had them drop mines for about a minute before then moving them to a new position and then dropping more mines and then to another position and dropping even more. I must have had, I can't remember how many segments there were now. It was 11, 12 years ago now. A long time indeed. Suffice to say, these walls of mines that were now surrounding the resource operation were simply huge. There were dozens of mines, perhaps more than 200. The mines by themselves were not the most powerful, but with 200 mines, suddenly this resource operation that didn't look like it was defended at all, well, it was a lot more defended than Mad Grenade thought it was when he discovered it with one of his probes or something. Now, Mad Grenade's abilities to manage his resources was second to none. It was leagues above my own levels. And by this time that I was, I think, maybe starting to build some ion cannon frigates, he had a heavy cruiser, which is the best, biggest, most armoured capital ship in the game. It's such a powerful ship, the ultimate prize, and my favourite ship in the game. So when he saw this resource operation that seemed to have no defences whatsoever, like I'd just completely forgotten about it, he decided that he was going to try and humiliate me, and he brought in his heavy cruiser, and some frigates, and I think a destroyer as well. He was pulling out all the stops to destroy my carrier and all those resources. But he didn't bring in a single strike craft, that is to say a scout or an interceptor or a bomber or anything. He didn't bring in corvettes. He didn't expect any resistance from fighters, so why should he bother bringing any in? He would just send in the big guns and let them do all the work. Now the thing is with these mines, bearing in mind that this game released in 1999, the mines didn't exactly stick out like a sore thumb, and that's kind of the goal with a mine. You don't want it to be noticeable, and so they looked a lot like the space dust that was in the game. There was no real way to detect them unless you were actively looking for them, and well, given that my mines were set up in this wall formation in 3x3 grids essentially, one would think that you would notice the clearly artificial pattern amongst the chaos of the space dust. But this was in the middle of an asteroid field, a map that, as I recall, had this massive ring of asteroids around the map. So it's pretty understandable why he didn't see the mines until they started moving. Because the mines were homing mines. The moment something big enough got within range, they would start moving towards that target. Now, unfortunately, I don't remember the exact results of, well, this particular engagement in the battle as a whole. I know that I did some serious damage. I must have destroyed at least one of his heavy ships, potentially his destroyer, and I know that I crippled his heavy cruiser, but I know that he got it out of there. The health of that heavy cruiser was in the red. If there was only just a bit more time between him deciding to hyperspace that cruiser out of there, I might have destroyed one of his most valuable ships in the game, and he would have wasted a huge amount of resources on that ship just to lose it to a bunch of corvettes that only cost maybe 900 resource units. Compared to that heavy cruiser, that's a drop in the metaphorical ocean. Unfortunately for me, Mad Grenade quickly got his act together. He had been surprised, but he got back into the groove, and he brought in those strike craft that he had neglected to bring in the first place. And he set them to attack all, which is this special command that you can use to shoot at asteroids, shoot at friendlies, or in this case, shoot at the mines that were still swarming what remaining ships he had in the region. And because this was a scout swarm he'd sent in, well, the scouts were faster than the mines, and unfortunately, my mines very quickly disappeared. About 15 minutes later, the battle was lost. My resources fell. My few remaining combat units also fell. My mothership also soon, eventually, destroyed. Possibly by my own hand. I may have scuttled it, I don't remember, but eventually it was a loss. When we got back to the chat lobby, Mad Grenade, he wasn't mad, like his name might suggest. In fact, the surprise had been entirely welcome. Remember, this was 13 years after the game had released. Everyone thought they had found all the strategies that could be found. No one had ever imagined, at least in this clique, to use the mine layer corvettes. They'd just been perhaps misused, kind of like a big old bomber of some sort, which was not what they were designed to be. But no one liked these mine layer corvettes, and no one really bothered to use them. And then I came along and laid these massive minefields to defend my resourcing operation, and overnight changed the meta. Suddenly, mine layer corvettes had a use. They were useful. And they were a cheap, reasonably effective way to defend resourcing operations. No longer would you need to try and create huge amounts of scouts to try and defend each separate resourcing operation. All you needed was some mines. That's all. Mad Grenade was incredibly impressed, and that was perhaps the linchpin moment that allowed me to be accepted into the TFL clan. Unfortunately, that was one of the last games I played with Mad Grenade, I think. I certainly don't remember many of the others. Sometime in late 2012, he stopped showing up. And by 2013, I had a new computer. I lost access to my old Game Ranger account, and, well, I've not really been on it since. I don't know how Mad Grenade is anymore. I know he lives in the UK, like me, in a place called Staines, wherever that is. But aside from that, I don't know how he is. So Mad Grenade, if by any chance you end up watching this, Babylon says hi. Oh, and I never did manage to beat Mad Grenade in battle. Oh well.